Welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. Now, I have owned the Nikon D810 and the 70 to 200 4.0 zoom lens for about 10 years, and I have never used this combination to take photographs of birds. Now, I have some bird feeders set up behind my house, and I photographed there many times using my Z8 with the 70 to 200 2.8 and the teleconverter. Previous to that, I was using my Nikon D500 and also my 7100. And I'll put a link to some of those videos in the description below. But I've really only used this combination, the D810 and the 70 to 200 F4, for studio type portraits, for some hospitals that I do work for, a lot of nurses and doctors and administrators. And I have also used this combination for many years for senior portraits for a high school whose seniors and underclassmen I photograph every year. And it works out great for that. Works out really well with studio type portraits. I prefer it actually to my Z8 for that. And that's because it has the 5:4 image ratio image area that scales right up to 8 by 10, which the Z8 doesn't have. So I decided to see what it can do photographing birds from my back door. Now, my bird feeders are set up about 18 feet from the sliding glass door. So a full frame camera such as the D810 with a 200 millimeter lens isn't quite long enough. So what I did, I shot in DX mode. So of course that gives me the equivalent of the field of view of a 300 millimeter lens. But honestly, even that isn't enough, especially when you're photographing small birds such as this dark-eyed junco. So these images were cropped pretty heavily. So on this image here, you're going to see this is without any crop using DX mode of this European starling up in the tree. So then of course, what I did, I cropped it in tighter. And the image is sharp. It's just that you do lose definition cropping so much. So, you're cropping a 15 megapixel image, which is what you get with the D810 in DX mode. So there is definitely a loss of quality. So I don't think it's the ideal setup. Of course, it would be better to have a longer lens. I would say, at least maybe a 400. And here's another shot with no crop. This is at DX mode with the 70 to 200. And then this image here, few seconds later, of the same bird, heavily cropped. And you get some good detail, but it's not ideal. You wouldn't be able to print large from an image like this. And my ISOs varied. I had the camera set for auto ISO, and the light was changing. And sometimes these birds set back if they're on the branch on the tree, as you see here, there was a little less light than they were when they were on the fence. And then the sun did pop out, so it enabled me to shoot at some lower ISOs. But the D810 is very good in high ISO performance. Not as good as the Z8, not as good as the Z6, but it works out fairly well. And here we have a house sparrow hanging on to the feeder with the suet in it. And they really seem to like the suet. And here's another house sparrow. And I was shooting in manual exposure mode. I said earlier in auto ISO. And my aperture varied 5.6, f8 on some. And my shutter speed was around 1,000th of a second. I could have used a slower shutter speed on most of these images since the birds were pretty stationary. And I used standard picture control and shot in RAW and converted in Lightroom using camera settings. Lightroom was set up to use camera settings. And here we have that European starling on a branch. And here's the cropped version. And when I started out on this particular day, I had the camera set for group area AF. And I noticed I was losing focus sometimes, since the birds were so small in the frame. So I switched to single point AF and it seemed to lock in better. I was using continuous autofocus, but no question that the Z8, with its specific setting for birds that will focus right in on the bird's eye, is superior to using an older camera that doesn't have that feature. And you had to be really sure to keep that single point right on the bird. Now, I had the camera on a monopod, but it was a little difficult. Even though the birds were not moving around too much, they were kind of jumping around a little and they're moving the head back and forth from one side to the other. So I think this worked out okay. I just wanted to try it, and I don't think I would probably shoot this way again. Why should I when I have the availability of the Z8 with the 70 to 200 2.8 and the teleconverter? And even that combination, while very good, is not as good as using a longer lens without a teleconverter. You're always going to lose some quality with the teleconverter, and the Nikon two-time teleconverter for the Z8 is good, but like I said, there is a loss of some quality. Now, this is probably my favorite shot on this particular day of this house finch with a seed in its mouth. And this, again, of course, was with the 7200 at f8, 1/1000th of a second. And the ISO on this was around 5,000. So I did use denoise in Lightroom, and it really improved the image. And the reason I got so much noise is because this was so heavily cropped along with the high ISO. And denoise is a great addition to Lightroom for high ISO images where you want to really reduce that noise. So in conclusion, it works, this combination. It's not ideal. If this is all you have, if you have a D810 and you have this particular lens and you want to shoot some birds that are not too far away, it works, but you could do a lot better with a longer lens. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions on this video or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I always try to respond to all questions and all comments. And I usually publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I will talk to you then.